So you listen carefully to the scripture readings that Victoria read this morning. You got a sense that water played a big role in both of these readings from Ezekiel and from Revelation. So I want to begin by showing you some slides from our recent trip. This is probably get sick of this pretty soon here, from our trip to Israel. So, Kevin, if you got the first slide, it must be water. That's the Sea of Galilee. Okay. There are marshes, there are reeds that sort of surround that sea. That's the Sea of Galilee. Going. That's the Sea of Galilee sunrise. Beautiful. Little birds flying around. You can almost picture Jesus there. Next slide. There's a boat on the Sea of Galilee. Obviously not the boat I was on, but a boat. There are a number of these boats that go out on the sea, and you can go out and actually preach the sermon when I was out on one of these boats on the Sea of Galilee. Going and okay, that's you know what that's from, right? I got permission to show it. Don't worry. Okay, keep going. It's not the Titanic. Now, that's the Jordan River. And that's not really the place where Jesus got baptized, but it's the Jordan River. And a number of us were able to go and make a reaffirmation of faith. I can tell you it's cold. And they give you these little white robes to change into, and you walk in there. And so a couple of the other ministers and I were helping people make affirmations of faith, reaffirmations of faith. And so while they had to just go in and go out, we had to stand in there for 20 minutes. It was pretty cold. Next. This is, when Victoria was reading about En-Gedi from Ezekiel, this is En-Gedi. It's an oasis in the desert, in the wilderness. You'll see there are a couple of waterfalls, and this is a beautiful picture of one of them. Next. And there's me at the lower waterfall, looking like summer, January. And that's En-Gedi. It's an oasis in the desert. Keep going.
That's it.
That's it. Okay, well, stop there then. Let's go back. No, not let's go back to the very beginning to the sermon slide. Thank you. Talking about water, because water is very much the theme of this morning's sermon. Ezekiel chapter 47. 25 years of ministry, I don't think I've ever preached on this particular text before. Part of the reason is that it's not in the lectionary. So the lectionary is this 3-year cycle of texts that go through the major themes of the Bible every 3 years. So it's not part of the lectionary, so it doesn't come up regularly. Another part of the reason is that it's plain weird, like most of the book of Ezekiel. Right? If you read through Ezekiel, some people claim that in the very first chapter of the book of Ezekiel, there's a reference to UFOs. You got to read pretty hard to see it, but there are wheels within wheels and things spinning around. Maybe, doubt it. And then in other places, you've got dry bones coming to life, and sinew and flesh growing on them as they're dancing around. It's just kind of a weird book. Ezekiel is a prophet from the time of Israel's exile in Babylon, about 550 years or so before the birth of Jesus. And his prophecy is both a warning about the coming destruction to Israel because of their continued idolatry, but also a promise. God's promise to renew and restore God's people. And as strange as a book that it might be, it's really an important book. Because the imagery that Ezekiel presents gets taken up again in the New Testament, especially in the book of the Revelation. Right? We read that from John's Revelation. The text in Ezekiel 47 is part of the last section of Ezekiel's writing. It's a section that speaks of this time yet to come, when God will restore the people of Israel from exile. And Ezekiel then speaks of a New Jerusalem. The theme of this New Jerusalem is picked up again in Revelation. And Ezekiel speaks of a temple in the heart of this New Jerusalem. And flowing from this temple, as Victoria read, is water. flowing from this temple is water, deep rushing water. And the water flows from the temple toward that place where nothing grows, right? The Dead Sea. So if you think of where Jerusalem is and where the Dead Sea is, the water flows like that, and En-Gedi is right there, just on the way there. The water from the temple, though, will flow, and it will make the water in the Dead Sea fresh, bringing life wherever it goes. Now, if you've ever been to the Dead Sea, or if you know anything about the Dead Sea, you know it's dead. Too much salt. Nothing grows there. Things float. They even say you can't even put a boat on it because the salt level will corrode whatever you put on top of the Dead Sea. Nothing grows. It's dead. Ezekiel tells us that when the water from the temple flows to the Dead Sea, life will come with it. Life will come with it. This imagery of water is impossible to miss in Ezekiel's depiction of this New Jerusalem. Without water, no life is possible. And it's really interesting when you consider that Jerusalem is one of the few major cities of the ancient world which wasn't actually built on a body of water. Right? It's not built next to an ocean or a lake or even a major river. Right? The only source of water in Jerusalem is like an underground spring. Okay? And it's nothing really big. In fact, probably Ahab, one of the kings, had built a bit of an aqueduct to bring water into Jerusalem. Right? But I mean, it's nothing that you could put a boat on. There's really hardly any water in Jerusalem. So it's interesting that Ezekiel's vision of a restored Jerusalem contains this abundance of water. So abundant in fact that it gives life wherever it flows, even to places like the Dead Sea. And then John in the book of Revelation picks up on this theme when he describes his vision of the New Jerusalem. And in John's vision, John sees the river of life flowing from the throne of God and of the Lamb through the middle of the street of the city. In John's vision of the New Jerusalem, there's no temple. There's no temple in the city because the Lord God Almighty is the temple. Right? God is the temple. You don't need a building to worship God when God is present everywhere. The water flows directly from the throne of God. The effect is the same. The water brings life. Water brings life. The water gives life to the trees that bear fruit. In Ezekiel's vision, the leaves of the trees are for healing. And it means the healing of Israel. But in John's vision, this whole restoration isn't only about Israel. John's vision of a new heaven and a new earth isn't only about the healing of Israel, it's about the healing of the world, right? So therefore, in John's vision, the leaves are indeed again for healing, but healing of all the nations, not only Israel. So you see this very, very inclusive, universal nature of God's grace, God's restoration at the end of time, not only for Israel, but for all creation. Whether it's Ezekiel or Revelation, this imagery of water is central to both. Water is the key in the renewed and restored life of Jerusalem, and water is the key to the renewed life of creation. Life depends on water. The water that flows from the temple, the water that flows from the very throne of God. And water is also key to the imagery in the movie Roma. This is the last of our movies from our series of Academy Award nominees. The show is tonight, right? So if you want to watch it. You'll probably be in the minority. I like Roma. I like the movie. I think it's an interesting movie. And it's the name Roma, don't play it yet, but the name Roma comes from a neighborhood in Mexico City in which the director of the movie, Alfonso Cuarón, grew up. So he grew up in this city, in this neighborhood called Roma. And the movie is basically based on his memories of his childhood, his family, and in particular his childhood nanny. And that nanny becomes a person by the name of Cleo in the movie, and she is played by the first-time actress, Yalitza Aparicio. She's an indigenous person from Mexico, and this is her first movie ever, and she's been nominated for Best Actress as well. Roma is a story about people and their lives. It's nothing like A Star is Born. or Black Panther, right? These movies, A Star is Born, Black Panther, many of these other movies have identifiable themes. There's a plot that drives the movie. Roma is not like those kinds of movies. It's about life. It's about life. And it can be hard when you watch it for the first time to discern explicit themes or a driving plot. I don't think there really is one. It also happens to be in Spanish and shot in black and white. It takes place over the course of a year in the life of an upper middle class family in Mexico City where Cleo, who is indigenous, works as one of the domestic servants. The family that she works for actually cares for her, and she's adored by their 4 children. However, the marriage of the parents is unraveling, and this tumultuous life of this busy family is about to get much more unpredictable and chaotic. And Cleo's own life is about to get much more busier and unpredictable than she had imagined or bargained for. Cleo meets a young man by the name of Fermin, and she gets pregnant. When she tells him about her pregnancy during a movie, Fermin excuses himself to use the washroom, but it soon becomes clear that he has abandoned her and isn't coming back. Now, as the events transpire in the movie, Cleo happens to meet Fermin again, but now Fermin, who has been a martial arts buff all of his life, has become part of this gang that's been hired by the Mexican government to beat up student revolutionaries who are clamoring for democracy. And he and his friends shoot a man during a riot. And he's holding a gun, and he happens to meet Cleo, who is quite pregnant at this point. And it's at that meeting that Cleo's water breaks. Again, there's water everywhere in this movie. The water in many of Quran's movies plays a key role in the imagery and the meaning. So I want you to watch this trailer for Roma, and I also want you to watch for how many times you see water in this trailer. Okay? Can we get the lights? If you watch the movie, the opening credits begin with water. It's a shot of the driveway to the house, and Cleo is washing the driveway. There are buckets and buckets of water that are used, and in the reflection of that water, as you saw at the very end of that trailer, you can actually see the sky. So the water that covers the driveway reflects the sky. It's almost as if the director, Quran, wanted to make the point that the link between the earth and the heavens is water. The images of water in this movie connect the lives of people in the movie, lives that really seem disparate and detached with very, very little in common. I mean, Cleo is nothing like the family who she works for. Yes, she occupies the same space, And while the family genuinely appreciates Cleo, the lines are clearly drawn. She is the help, right? She is the help. At a Christmas party held at the home of friends, it's clear that the indigenous servants are expected to gather in their space, while the rest of the families gather in the affluent main home. So this movie leads us through life and the sometimes chaos that life brings our way. Cleo's employers are breaking up, and life will never be the same again for those children. Her unexpected pregnancy and the unanticipated ending to that pregnancy also embodies the fragility and the unpredictability of life. Mexico itself, in the early 1970s, is experiencing a societal upheaval, with student movements for democracy threatening the governments of the day. People of every class, of every age, of every status and condition, whether they're powerful or weak, master or servant, rich or poor, young or old, they're experiencing the creeping loss that sometimes comes with life. The breakup of family, the finding and the losing of love, the finding and the losing of life. And Roma tells a story that says, in all of this, we are connected. We're all connected. We're all connected. That in the ordinary and the sometimes chaos of life, water connects us, sweeping things clean, renewing us, rebirthing us, bringing hope and healing, where pain is often left unspoken and unresolved. The end of the movie is the most poignant and most powerful part. And I'm sorry I'm giving spoilers away, but I suspect you'll watch it if you want to, if you haven't already. Cleo and the family go to the beach. Ostensibly it's for a holiday, but really it's so that they can be away from the home when the father returns to get his stuff. They don't want the kids to be there. The kids now want to go swimming at the beach, and of course they're warned, don't venture too far out because the tide is strong. But of course kids never listen, and one of them gets caught up far too deep. So Cleo, who by this time in the movie has just recently lost her baby, and who can't swim, goes out into the water, risking her life to save the life of this child. And when they all stumble back onto the beach, it's there, huddled together, drenched with water, that Cleo lets out her pain, her own pain, saying, I didn't want her, I didn't want the baby, I didn't want the baby to be born. And it's a moment of catharsis, of release. Right? All this pain that she's been carrying around with her for months. And in that moment of her pain, she is surrounded by those who truly love her. This family that truly loves her, who truly cares for her, despite the differences in their class, in their status, despite the fact that she actually works for them. At that moment, she is truly, truly loved. The movie ends with her going back there. I'll go back home, and she dutifully resumes her job, right? But that moment, when she's surrounded by love, continues to resonate. And I think there's a sense that each of us, all of us, need that connection. We long for that connection, that sense of being loved. To know that we are loved. To know that we belong somewhere. That we are united to one another. That there's something bigger going on in the midst of all that we're experiencing. Both good and bad. There's a hope. There's a yearning for that in all of us. And I think that's part of what the movie Roma is getting at. And for us as Christians, for we Christians, that symbolism, of course, comes also with water. The waters of our baptism. The water by which we die and are raised in Christ. The water by which our Creator, our God, claims us as the children of God. Each of us, all of us, together. The living water that flows from God washes away the dirt and the debris that builds up in life, cleanses us from the grit and the grime of life's chaotic moments, and in the life that it gives, it brings healing to us, and hopefully through us, to the nations. In a way, as I read the texts from Ezekiel and from Revelation, it seems to me that when God desires what God desires when God chooses to restore and renew, whether it's Israel or all of creation, what God desires in that renewal is healing. Healing. That's what God is looking for. God intends healing so that we can know life in its fullest. It's pretty clear that in Ezekiel's vision of a renewed Jerusalem, it also includes a renewed people, right? The people that will return from exile to be renewed, healed. I wonder whether in some way, in John's vision of the new heavens and the new earth, I wonder if we are not the leaves of the tree of life. I wonder if we don't understand ourselves to be leaves of the tree of life. In the vision that John speaks of in Revelation, I wonder whether God doesn't intend us to be the leaves that are for the healing of the nations. If the water of God's healing flows through us as God's people, wouldn't it be so that we as God's people could be agents of God's healing in our world? Shouldn't we be acting as the leaves of the trees that are meant for healing? Wouldn't that be a faithful precursor to the new heaven and the new earth that God has in mind for us? Maybe you'll see Roma if you haven't seen it yet. I've pretty much spoiled the movie for you, and I will say, disclaimer, there's a scene which may shock you in it. If you're uncomfortable with certain aspects of nudity, don't watch it. Maybe you can ask your kids, your son or your daughter or your grandchildren for their Netflix account, and they might give you the password for their account, so you can watch it sometime in the comfort of your couch. It's not a blockbuster, action-filled movie. It's not a formulaic romance story. What you're going to find in Roma is a movie about life. It's a movie about life. It's a movie that really cares for all of the characters that it depicts and says that all of these lives, whether joyful or tragic, whether uplifting or depressing, whether young and too naive or too old and jaundiced, that all of these lives, all of our lives, are connected and they're important. Roma is a movie that invites us to pay attention to life, to all of life, to all the people in our lives, for the beauty that they embody, sometimes even in chaos. Maybe it'll inspire us to see the people around us as God sees them, as God sees us. People, beloved ones, to be healed, to be nourished, to be renewed, and to be restored. So friends, may the life-giving water of God that flows from the throne of God renew our hope for the future for all of us together, all of us together. May we be leaves of healing. May each of us be leaves of healing for each other and for the nations. May the life-giving river of the water of life in which we are baptized renew us and equip us and inspire us to live as agents of God's healing and reconciling love. Thanks be to God. Amen.